Walter Bennett had been dreaming of this day for months. At 67, the retired schoolteacher had saved every penny to splurge on a first-class ticket.
Welcome to Shadow Crime. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
A surprise for his son Jackson, the pilot of Flight 287 to Chicago. Walter's hands trembled with excitement as he boarded, his worn tweed jacket a humble contrast to the plush leather seats. His silver hair gleamed under the cabin lights, and his eyes crinkled with the kind of warmth that had comforted decades of students. This wasn't just a flight. It was a reunion, a father's pride soaring at 30,000 feet. But the moment he settled in, the air turned sour. Tom and Katie, the first-class flight attendants, didn't even try to hide it. Tom's lip curled as he sized Walter up, muttering under his breath about who let him in here. Katie rolled her eyes, her vague smile vanishing faster than the complimentary champagne she didn't offer. Walter asked for a blanket. His arthritis always flared in the chill, and Tom just snorted, "We're busy." Busy. The cabin was half empty. When dinner rolled around, they slammed a tray down 20 minutes after everyone else. The chicken, cold and the roll stale. "You'll manage," Katie snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Walter blinked, stunned. He'd taught kids manners for 35 years. Where were theirs? It got worse. "Move it, old man," Tom barked when Walter shuffled to the restroom, loud enough for heads to turn. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Now Walter's cheeks burned, the sting of humiliation sinking deep. Then came the breaking point. Katie waltzed over with a tray of steaming soup, her smirk daring him to complain. She tripped, a theatrical stumble, and the scalding broth splashed across Walter's lap. Pain shot through him as he gasped, clutching his soaked pants. "Oops," she said, not a shred of remorse in her voice. Tom snickered from the galley. Walter's hands shook, not from the burn, but from the weight of being treated like trash. In a seat he'd paid for, first-class money, third-class respect. He didn't know why. Was it his age, his skin a shade darker than theirs, his quiet demeanor? All he wanted was to see Jackson, to beam at his boy in that captain's hat. Instead, he sat there, damp and degraded, the hum of the plane mocking his silence. But something flickered in Walter's chest, a spark. He'd faced worse in his day. This wasn't over. A father's big day turns into a nightmare. What's behind the hate? Stay tuned. This is just takeoff. The plane touched down in Chicago with a jolt, but Walter Bennett barely felt it. His lap still stung from the soup. His pride stung worse. He'd spent the last hour of Flight 287 swallowing rage, hands clenched in his soggy trousers, replaying. Every sneer from Tom and Katie. The elderly teacher wasn't one for scenes. He'd spent a lifetime calming storms, not starting them. But this cut deep. As passengers filed out, he lingered, steadying himself for the walk of shame. Then he saw him, Jackson, his son, standing at the cockpit door in his crisp captain's uniform, a wide grin breaking across his face. Walter's heart leapt until Jackson's eyes dropped to the mess staining his father's clothes. "Dad?" Jackson's voice cracked, his grin vanishing. He rushed forward, steadying Walter as the old man stepped into the galley. "What the hell happened?" Walter tried to wave it off, mumbling about a spill, but Jackson wasn't buying it. His gaze snapped to the crew, Tom and Katie, hovering nearby, suddenly pale as the cabin walls. "Who did this?" Jackson demanded, his pilot's authority cutting through the hum of deboarding chatter. Tom stammered, It was an accident, sir," while Katie nodded too fast, her smirk gone. "Just a little slip, no big deal." Jackson's jaw tightened. He wasn't just the captain, he was Walter's boy, and he knew his dad. The man who'd taught him to tie a tie, to stand tall, didn't deserve this. He wheeled on the attendants, voice low but lethal. "An accident? You ignored him, insulted him, and dumped food on him. Don't play dumb with me." Tom's mouth flapped, fishing for excuses. "We didn't know he was—" Katie cut in. "We'd never have—" Jackson raised a hand, silencing them. "You didn't know he was my father. That's your defense. You shouldn't treat anyone like that." The crew froze, realization dawning like a punch to the gut. Walter, still damp and quiet, met Jackson's eyes, a flicker of pride amidst the hurt. "Son, let it go," he murmured, but Jackson shook his head. "No, Dad, this isn't a mistake. It's discrimination. Plain and simple. Age, race, whatever they pinned on you, it's wrong." Passengers lingered, phones creeping out, catching every word. Tom and Katie shrank, busted in the glare of Jackson's fury. A son's love collides with a crew's shame. What's next for Walter? Hit that like. This runway's heating up. Jackson Bennett wasn't letting this slide. The second Flight 287's passengers cleared out. He marched his father, still reeking of soup and quiet dignity, straight to the crew lounge. Walter tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Don't make a fuss, son." But Jackson's eyes blazed. "No, Dad, they don't get to do this and walk away." He'd seen the hurt in Walter's face, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of Tom and Katie's cruelty. Captain or not, this was personal. He grabbed his phone, dialed the airline's ops manager and laid it out. Every snide remark, every intentional slight, the scalding accident caught on a passenger's shaky video, now buzzing online. The manager, a gruff guy named Hargrove, showed up fast, tie askew, sweat beading. Jackson didn't mince words. "My father, Walter Bennett, paid for first class and got treated like garbage. Your crew's a disgrace. I want an investigation now." Hargrove sputtered, glancing at Walter's stained clothes, then at the clip already hitting X with Lounge Flight 287 trending. "We'll look into it," he started, but Jackson cut him off. "Not good enough. Suspend them, Tom and Katie, today. And don't you dare bury this." Walter stood silent, watching his son wield authority like a gavel. By noon, the airline caved. Tom and Katie were off the roster, grounded pending a full probe. Passengers from the flight cheered on socials, "About time," as the video racked up views. But Jackson wasn't done. He faced Hargrove, voice steady as steel. "An apology to my dad's a start, but this isn't just about him. No one, old, young, black, white, should board your planes and feel like less than human. Fix your training, your culture, or I'm not flying for you." Hargrove nodded, rattled. The airline scrambled, drafting a public statement, but Jackson's words echoed louder online. Clips of his stand going viral, captioned, "Pilot hero calls out bigots." Walter squeezed his son's shoulder, a faint smile breaking through. "Proud of you," he rasped. Jackson grinned back. "Learn from the best. Will the airline step up or cover up? A son's fight shakes the skies. Don't miss what's next." The fallout from Flight 287 hit the airline like turbulence at cruising altitude. By the time the investigation wrapped, the evidence was a mile high. Passenger testimonies, that viral soup spill video, even a grainy clip of Tom muttering, "He doesn't belong up here," caught by a seatmate's phone. Walter Bennett, the soft-spoken retiree, had become a reluctant symbol, his soaked tweed jacket plastered across every news feed. Jackson, his captain's son, wasn't backing off either, hounding the brass until they squirmed. The pressure, online, outrage, to boycott sky-high trending, and a captain ready to walk, forced their hand. Change was coming, whether they liked it or not. A week later, a crisp envelope landed in Walter's mailbox. Inside, a letter from the CEO, all polished apologies. "Mr. Bennett, we deeply regret the treatment you endured. Your experience was unacceptable, and we're taking action." Walter read it aloud to Jackson over coffee, his voice steady but eyes misty. The airline wasn't just groveling, they were moving. Every employee, from gate agents to pilots, got marched into mandatory anti-discrimination training, no exceptions. PowerPoints on respect, role plays on bias. Tom and Katie's faces might as well have been the poster kids for what not to do. Speaking of them, the axe hovered. Suspended without pay, they were dangling on the edge of pink slips, their fates sealed by a review board that wasn't in the mood for excuses. The airline rolled out a shiny new pledge, blasted across press releases and social media. Sky High commits to a fair, welcoming environment for all, no exceptions. They revamped customer service protocols, faster responses, stricter oversight, a hotline for complaints. TikTok lit up with finally comments. YouTube ran hot takes titled Airline Forced to Care. Walter, watching from his recliner, chuckled at the fuss. Didn't want all this, he told Jackson. His son grinned. Too late, Dad. You're a legend now. It wasn't perfect. Skeptics online grumbled. PR stunt, and the training wouldn't undo every bad apple overnight. But for Walter, it was a win. He'd flown to see his boy, not to start a revolution, yet here he was, shifting an industry. Jackson clapped his shoulder. You taught me to stand up, guess it stuck. Walter nodded, pride swelling. The skies might not be fully fair yet, but they'd cracked open a door, and he'd walked through it. Will the changes stick? Or is it all talk? A father's fight lands a blow. Stay tuned for the final climb. Walter Bennett sat on his porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. The chaos of Flight 287 felt like a lifetime ago. His stained clothes were washed, the burns faded, but the echoes of that day stuck with him. He sipped his tea, replaying it all. The sneers, the soup, Jackson's fury. At 67, he'd always figured fairness was a given. You work hard, you earn respect. But the skies had taught him otherwise. It hit him slow, then hard. Change doesn't just happen. It's fought for. If he hadn't been the captain's dad, if Jackson hadn't roared, would Tom and Katie still be smirking up there? Walter shivered. Silence lets the rot fester. He'd stood up, shaky but sure, and the world had shifted. Jackson joined him, still in his pilot's jacket, hat tucked under his arm. You okay, Dad? He asked, settling into the chair beside him. Walter nodded, a quiet strength in his gaze. Better than okay. I get it now, son. Nothing moves unless someone pushes. Jackson leaned forward, eyes fierce. Then I'm pushing too. What happened to you? It's not happening again, not on my watch. He'd already started, grilling crewmates, flagging biases, drafting ideas for better training. I fly people for a living, he said. They deserve to feel human, not judged by some jerk with a drink cart. They sat there, father and son, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't just their story anymore. That viral video, Walter wins, racking up millions, had sparked something bigger. Passengers posted their own tales, snubs, slights, worse. The airline's reforms were a start, but Walter and Jackson saw the truth. One fight doesn't fix a system. It cracks it open. How many folks never speak up? Walter mused aloud. Jackson's jaw tightened. Too many. But we did, and they're listening now. The porch creaked under their shared silence, a bond forged in turbulence. Walter smiled, faint but real. Guess I raised a troublemaker. Jackson laughed. Learned from a pro. They clinked mugs, a pact unspoken. This mattered for every passenger boarding a plane, hoping for dignity, not disdain. The war wasn't won, but the battle, it was theirs. One flight sparked a movement. Will it soar or stall? Hit subscribe. This duo's rewriting the skies. The journey of Walter Bennett and Jackson unveils timeless lessons, particularly resonant for those in the later chapters of life. At its core, their story whispers a truth the elderly know well. Dignity isn't guaranteed, it's claimed. Walter, a retired teacher with decades of quiet service, faced humiliation, not for what he did, but for who he was perceived to be. Yet he didn't crumble. He endured, and with Jackson's fierce stand, they turned a personal wound into a public reckoning. For older folks, this is a gentle nudge. Your worth doesn't fade with age. The world may overlook you, discount your gray hair, your slower step, but you carry a lifetime of grit. Stand tall even when the seat you've earned feels hostile. Because your presence still commands change. Another layer shines through, the power of legacy. Walter didn't set out to be a hero, but his ordeal lit a fire in Jackson, who vowed to carry the torch. For the elderly, this reflects the quiet might of influence. You may not march or shout, but the values you've lived, fairness, courage, ripple through those you've raised or touched. Your voice, weathered by years, can still stir the young to act, turning your struggles into their strength. It's not about grand gestures, it's about the seeds you've planted, blooming long after you've stepped back. Finally, their tale speaks to persistence amid imperfection. The airline shifted, but not fully. The fight goes on. For those who've seen decades pass, this mirrors life's slow grind. Justice, like healing, takes time. Yet Walter and Jackson show that starting matters more than finishing. Elderly hearts know this. You've faced battles, some won, some lost, and each one shaped you. So, don't shy from the fray, even now. Speak up at the family table. Share your story with a neighbor. Small acts ripple. Walter's twilight years didn't dim his impact. They amplified it. Yours can too. Age isn't a retreat. It's a vantage point, a chance to guide, to nudge the world a little closer to right, proving that every season holds purpose if you claim it.